I got cut off there. I'm using the free version of screencast-o-matic, and there's a 15-minute limit. So I do want to get back into the indicators related to Domain 2. As I was saying, Competency 2.1 is about daily learning targets and how you refer back to those, and your instruction is driven by moving in the direction of those student-friendly goals. As we look at 2.2, it is probably the most traditional view of teaching, and it's how you present your content. It's the emphasis, it's the excitement. It's important to be more guide on the side than sage on the stage. Don't let the idea of presenting content make you feel like there has to be an aspect where you're a sage on the stage. That is really less important than how the next few indicators impact the flow of your lesson. 2.3, engage students in academic content. What's important about that is sometimes I'll go into a classroom and I'll see high compliance. Students are facing the front, they're not talking, they're showing good posture, but that doesn't mean the same thing as deep engagement. We want to see the guide on the side type approach, students that are deeply active and not passive. If I were to ask, what were the students doing while you taught? If your answer is for a majority of the lesson, well, they were listening to me talk, that's not deep engagement. Students learn best when they're doing the work, they're engaging deeply with the material, they're reading, they're discussing, they're writing about what they're seeing, they're making connections. That's the kind of stuff that I'm going to need to see. And you want everybody doing that. You don't want it to be a small percentage of students are deeply engaged, and there's an option that students can choose to be passive. You want to set up your classroom in a way where everybody is engaged. 2.4, check for understanding. It's always going to be easier for me to give a high score to a teacher if I walk in and they've got a can with students' names on a popsicle stick and they're pulling them out randomly. It's tough for me to call it a check for understanding. If you ask a question, you wait for volunteers to raise their hand. That's almost like an agreement between the class and the teacher of like, I need just somebody to understand this so that we can move on. Where if you can pick somebody at random and they can give you the kind of information you need to check their understanding, that's better. Another thing you'll see when you're doing observations is there are teachers who will ask a question. It's important that these are open-ended, yes or no. It doesn't really tell you that much information. But if a teacher asks something like, Billy, give me an example of a mammal. And Billy says mouse. And then the teacher says, very good. A mouse is a mammal. It provides milk for its young. It has live birth, warm-blooded. I'm missing one. Hair or fur. Great job, Billy. Well, that was really Billy giving a small amount of information, the teacher really giving a lot of exposition around it. Where if instead the teacher asks the same question, but instead of it being directed just to Billy, if all the students respond with different examples of mammals on a dry erase board and they hold them up and the teacher says, now I want you to pair up with somebody else and discuss what's alike or different about the examples you came up with, I'm going to try to look around and see if I can find any common misconceptions from your answers. That's a much better way to check for understanding than to ask a really good question and just find out if that one person, if Billy understood, an example of a mammal. Also, feel free to get an answer from a student and instead of evaluating the answer, bounce that answer off somebody else. Julie, do you think that Billy's answer was correct? Do you want to add anything? Do you need to ask any clarifying questions to fully understand Billy's answer? There's lots of ways that we can interact with the questioning dynamic that we use in classrooms to make it drive deeper and wider engagement than just, I want to see volunteers of who is confident they can answer this question. Competency 2.5 or the 2.5 indicator is to modify instruction as needed. It's tied to checks for understanding. If you ask these checks for understanding and students do well, and you continue to spend 20 more minutes on the same topic, even though the student showed you they could do it, that's not really modifying your instruction. And also, if you're checking for understanding and students are not with you and you continue with what you had planned anyway, that's not modifying either. You should be modifying instruction in a new way. You shouldn't just, well, they didn't get it, I'm going to give them the same type of instruction but louder. You should modify instruction, pushing the deep engagement. If there's a way to scaffold it so that the students kind of get themselves back on track, that builds the kind of mental pathways that we really need them to do, instead of them kind of just waiting for you to throw them a life vest. 2.6 is about rigorous and higher order thinking. You may be doing hard work or hard content in your class, but if students aren't writing about it, if you're not pushing them to think, to synthesize, to use different resources to combine and think about things in new ways, then it's not rigorous. It's not the high level understanding that we need. Do keep in mind that students should be writing more, but the best practice for writing is speaking. Students at the age that most of us have them are very social animals. They process information by speaking. So if they've just sat and listened for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes, there's not a great way for them to show higher level understanding or rigor outside of written response. And written response is very good, but don't be surprised if they're not ready for written response if you're not giving them a chance to think through and discuss their ideas. 2.7 is use of time. It's going to be important to have strong transitions where kids don't get way off task. It shouldn't take 5 minutes to get out a book and be ready to go. Kind of set those norms that they are ready for the next thing pretty quickly. I've discussed with some of you the idea of bell work. I like bell work because it takes me a minute to collect my thoughts at the beginning of the classroom. So I'd rather the students come in and see a task on the board and be able to get right to business. And then I can kind of re-engage with them between 1 and 5 minutes into class with that bell work done. There is a completely acceptable other train of thought of teachers who say, I can get attendance done so fast, I can hit the ground running at that tardy bell. I don't want to do bell work because that puts me 5 minutes behind when I can hit the ground running at that tardy bell. If you're one of those people, do keep in mind bell work is not a requirement. It is an idea of how you could manage time if you need a bunch of time. Not a bunch, I said bunch. A moment of time to take attendance, figure out, who is absent, who needs something. If you need that time, bell work is a good option. Bell work is not required because I do acknowledge that some people have other systems where they can hit the ground running at that tardy bell. 2.8 is the idea of a classroom culture of respect and collaboration. Are the students supportive of each other? Are they respectful? Do they talk to and about each other nicely? Does the teacher talk that way about the students? That's very important. Again, to get highly effective, the students can't just be passengers on that. They have to kind of help drive that culture in the classroom. 2.9 is setting high expectations for academic success. That one's sometimes hard to see if you don't have it set up in a way where students are writing about their goals or self-tracking their success. It's going to be hard for me to see highly effective. But if you let special education students sit to the side and not move towards mastery of the priority standards, then we're probably going to see a score that's not even effective. Displaying classroom work, student work in the classroom is kind of like a very tangible way that I can see high expectations for academic success. And again, this is also kind of just like an overall, if you're doing those other things right, if you got daily learning targets, if you're asking these probing questions where students are highly engaged, then that kind of creates this environment where if you're not doing those things, it's probably hard to have high expectations in that way. In the previous video, I had glossed over the prep exception for domain 3. I wanted to talk about what I meant there. You should do professional development kind of on your own time. But I also think it's fine if you're giving up a prep to watch a webinar, or if you're reading a book during your prep or something like that, that work still needs done. The grading, the planning, whatever you would have done during that prep, you're probably taking that home to do it on your own time also. So if we can get you a professional development during your prep, I want you to go ahead and count that for domain 3, even though it's very much on the clock, because I think that it's a zero-sum game. I think any professional development you're getting here, you're probably having to carry home, that kind of prep work to do on your own. So in my way, that's how I think about professional development. Should you count it for domain 3, or is it just kind of like an expectation of your job?